Okay, so we're gonna cover chapter 5. Let me get to it. And this chapter mostly talk about security operations in enterprises and how you should deal with threats and vulnerabilities. Let me share screen so I have it on the video. And then as we go along, we're gonna also answer our questions. So let me get that open also. And then at the end, we'll do the lab. So at the beginning of the chapter, it talks about 3 types of intelligence. And as you move along in the security class, we're going to dive a little deeper into the further understanding, but some of the stuff is going to be review from the other classes that you have learned already, concept that you know about security. So we want to re-emphasize a lot of the concepts and then expand on some of the concepts. So in the prior class, I'm sure you heard about building threat intelligence, and we'll talk a little bit more about threat intelligence and threat hunting today. So it breaks down into 3 categories of threat intelligence. The first one is tactical intelligence, and this is a way that we can gather information about the threats. And this is the primary responsibility is going to be for the analyst. So you will see some of the responsibility for different security professional. So tactical threat intelligence is short term. It focuses on short-term goals, and it's looking for emerging threats or new threats that impact technology and automation. So if we're looking at industrial automation type of systems or in manufacturing, right, we need to take a look at the type of threats that would currently impact us with the technology that we're using. And this is going to be part of our Security Operations Center or our SOC. You might hear some of that term. And we can implement tools and also SIEM system to be able to monitor or gather information about these threats. So let me give you the question and answer. So I kind of summarize the answer into little 3 paragraphs here. So there are 3 types of intelligence, threat intelligence, 3 categories for security operations. We talked about tactical threat intelligence. So this is performed by security experts, especially the analyst. And this is part of your SOC requirement or your SOC, Security Operations Center. So sometimes if you don't have an analyst, that can be performed by a security professional in the Security Operations Center. And we can use SIEM and security tools to gather threat information from real-time events. So that can be network traffic. It can also be incidents that we've seen or dealt with. And also, we would also need to pull the threat feeds, news, and updates that would relate to the technology that we're using to identify technical mitigation to meet short-term goals. So your short-term goals will be closing out the security gaps in specific systems or technology that you're using. For example, if you're using Windows operating system, right, you want to be able to obtain threat information that would be related to your Windows OS. Could be also for your server, that could be related to protocols and services and so on. So you want to close out the gap by building that threat intelligence, and that is part of tactical. Strategic threat intelligence, this is performed also by cybersecurity analysts, and it would use historical data or trend analysis So we would go back to logs and network data information or capture to be able to evaluate and gather information that can be for long-term goals. So this is for the bigger picture, right? In more of a longer timeline, we want to meet the objective and we really want to address the risk by building specific countermeasures or implement security solutions that will help the enterprise in the long run. So this means that we have to look at what had happened on the network and the systems by looking at logs. And then the third category in threat intelligence is your operational threat intelligence. This is performed usually by the forensic team or incident response team. And this is a way that we can understand the attacker techniques and methodologies by looking at logs of our system and prior attacks. So if we face denial of service attack or some form of attacks or even malware incidents, this is where we would need to investigate and be able to build out the intelligence and understanding of the approach, the methods that were used in those attacks, and then be able to build out solutions to prevent future attacks, right? So that will be your operational threat intelligence. So the analyst role plays, the analyst plays an important role in these areas. And then as you can see, forensic and incident response, that's also important in building out your threat intelligence. And a threat could be an attacker, but a threat could also be a malware, right? A threat could also be an internal person. So we'll talk about different threat actors. Half. We are half of us are here. Yep. Okay, any questions? So I condensed the answer and you can take a look at more details on the notes. Okay. And then there's a small section on commodity malware. This is more of a newer term that we see. So these type of malware are cross-platform. So that means that it impacts Windows, iOS, Linux, all different systems. And it has multiple purposes. Because usually a malware would have a purpose. For example, if you have remote access Trojan, right? Its purpose is to be able to open up access for remote user or from remote users. Or if you by getting the user to provide some credential information and so on. But you also have malware that have multiple purposes. Also maybe deleting files and then be able to spread that across the network and then also do other things. So you do see that malware complexity change over time. It's because the source code has been modified for these applications to behave a certain way. So this is really important for threat intelligence. You have to keep up with your malware knowledge or your knowledge base, okay? But the most important area, we want to make sure that we patch our systems because malware likes to play on the vulnerabilities of your system. So the next question it asks you, how does commodity malware impact the organization? And you should identify the security measure against commodity malware. So as we define it, it is a cross-platform type of malware. It also have multiple purpose. which has wider impact on organizations compared to other malware types. And the countermeasure for commodity malware includes patching systems, deploying anti-malware in the network. So that means that we have to have live scan going at all times, especially also for the endpoints. So if you have remote systems that are connecting in various part of your network, we want to make sure that we have those systems scanned as they are connecting before they are allowed onto the network, or as they are on the network, we need to monitor and scan. We also need to update the user on different types of malware and how they impact the operations. So that means that you also need to have periodic user security training. I think a lot of the times the enterprises are forgetting about, the traditional security training is like, don't click what you don't know, etc. But I think that people need to have more understanding on what is currently impacting, to be more effective in how they use the system. So your security training should include, the specific technology that they are using, and how, the malware is impacting those technology, and how the user should be more cautious or aware. I think that would hit home a little bit more compared to if you are just doing basic security training, which most organizations do, right? By, a training solution from someone and not customize it to what the organization would need. Okay. So for the second question, you can refer to the notes, which gives you a little bit more. And then it briefly talk about targeted attacks. I think that we do see a lot of supply chain being a target for a lot of the attacks, because that has a wider spread, I think, in the bigger scheme of things. And then you also see botnets being integrated for distributed denial of service. This has been around for a long time, but the growth in botnets, and when we do another question or another exercise down the line, you're gonna see distributed denial of service because of the demand for this form of attack. I think the growth of botnets is directly impacted. And then you do see a lot of spear phishing attacks for targeted attacks. So focusing on a group of employees in a certain type of organization. And I think that has more emphasis because the objective has changed over time in the type of attacks that we see. So for supply chain, to really expand on that, we should say that attacks that aim to target hardware and software that's provided by suppliers to the organization. So when we're seeing, third party or companies that are partner with the organization or enterprises to supply goods and services, they would use hardware and software to be able to track. For example, we see this every day, point of sale systems, right? You see that as part of maybe like the retail business. And then you also have goods or products that are being supplied for the inventory purposes for the retail company. And they would use a certain type of software to be able to track the inventory, which really sometimes can impose risk because we can't really control a lot of the third-party applications that we use to be able to maintain our database or be able to track our resources. So, and especially when you have a lot of different vendors. So in the retail business, like the grocery business, if you look at it, you have lots and lots of products, and these products come from a lot of different vendors. You might have one vendor that have a group of products, but you do have a wide variety of products, which require you to have some kind of, mainstream application to be able to track other vendors, but ultimately to do purchase orders and things from other vendors, you have to be able to use their product. And if they don't patch their software and hardware, it becomes a problem for the company. So supply chain is wide in that aspect in all industry. So we have to really be careful. So that means that we have to take a look at the firmware, right? And then also the updates for the software. So when you assess in this area, you kind of have to drill down on specific technology for various vendors. And then being able to look at the vulnerability for the software and then also the hardware. And that can be a very granular process. If they're using automated system, they're not using automated system and so on. So, and then work that into the risk analysis of how that will impact the operation. Okay, so we're on number 3, and we talk about supply chain as a target in the attacks. Now, in the next part, it goes into more of specific attacks. And you often hear the term nation state attack. The goals of these form of attacks is to really, target governments. And so the goals are to really destabilize governments. And that can change the way the resource is provided for that government or the resources flowing for that government. So that means that we would look at banking and supply funding. And or also we look at how critical infrastructure are impacted, like gas, like natural gas, right? A lot of our vehicles and things utilize gas for transporting goods. So we're looking at logistics systems that will be impacted. And then your power grid. So without that, right, people won't have power. And without power, we can disrupt a lot of things from business to everyday's life, right? Water supply, food source supply chain. So when we're looking at, also transportation, so train system, plane, bus, all of that can also impact the overall nation. So nation state attack is really a way to look at how someone or a group of individual or the attacker can disrupt the nation by targeting the main resources. And so I think there's a huge need in this area. And then later on when we do the exercise, I want to introduce you to Lockheed. I'm pretty sure you heard of the company. And then potentially maybe you can look into work for them.
There's one in Palmdale.
Yeah. And General Dynamics, someone had told me General Dynamics for the March Air Force Base here, occasionally they hire. I have to take a look at their job listing. If I see it, I'll let you know. But I do know a couple people who currently contract for General Dynamics, for specific locations. Yeah. All right. Any questions? Okay. So for 4, you can also refer to your notes when it goes over different types of actors. So the threat actors from APT, you can go through and take a look at APT, or you can also use Wikipedia and find some APT information. And then Mitre also provided some group of APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, right? They are at the high level, and you often see APT for the attacks of nation state. Okay. So as we look at the threat actors, we will go through and answer the next few questions. So given this below scenario, identify the type of threat actors that impose risk in enterprises. So A, this type of threat actors is one of the biggest reasons for security breaches. Statistically shown, 50% of breaches are attributed by accidents, intentions, or ignorance. And that will be insider threats, right? Someone can accidentally leak data. Someone can intentionally set up a way. Someone can infiltrate the network for another person to infiltrate the network. Or they can simply be ignorant about, or, they don't care about how to close out some of the security gaps. For example, like people would be ignorant about password usage or even logging off their computer or sharing the password with someone. So that's called a form of ignorance. So that can break down into some areas. And we can address some of this through, high level security screening for the people that we hire, also training the people to properly, and then making them sign agreements, non-disclosure agreements and other things to make sure that there are protection to the data that we have, which are assets to enterprises. And then for B, intellectual property design plans of commercial enterprises are targeted by these threat actors to enhance manufacturing. And that, falls into the competitors. So it could be competitor in other nations. An example of this would be like Boeing plane design, right? And that was leaked. So, a year later, you see a similar design for the plane in China. So competitors sometimes that they would pay individuals or group of people to be able to steal intellectual property from organizations because that is a high asset. And then C, anonymous is a group, right? We know that they launch attack for political reasons also, and also to retaliate based on their belief. And so they had targeted Sony, PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, and much more. And then recently Elon Musk for cryptocurrency tweet activity. So that's Hacktivist. And Anonymous is one of the larger group, but you do have other groups who are hacktivists as well. And then for D, this type of threat actors aims to vandalize a website or to prove they can gain access by downloading scripts for the attack. And when they use scripts, right, for the attack, sometimes they don't know the consequences of their attacks or how its attack can impact the larger infrastructure. They do it sometime for the high or to claim that they could do it. So this is the script kiddie. And they tend to be more dangerous because I think they just don't understand the further consequences of how their attack can impact the overall. It's just, more of a short-term type of attack. So what kind of resources do the threat actors need to perform their attacks against organization or the larger enterprises? Time, biggest area. And time would allow them to gather information. So recon takes a lot of time. Reconnaissance would require days, months, and year. Depends, right? Because the attack can happen in minutes. Very short time. And so you would need to dedicate a lot of time to investigate before that attack happens. Money. You would need money to buy systems, people, and connectivity, internet access, software, plenty of things that you would need that money would be able to supply. People with the proper skills and knowledge. So, and having a larger group in the type of attacks, depending on the attack that needs to be performed, has a bigger scale. So I think, in the more advanced attack that you see, that's not done by one person. That's usually by a group of people remotely in many places. So that way it's harder to pinpoint. Um, so I think more of the advanced attack, like if you're looking at advanced persistent threat, usually it's made up of the larger group of people with advanced skills. So your technical skills and knowledge goes a long way. And I didn't want to say technical skills only, but soft skills sometimes can get you through, like the human side of the house, right? Social engineering, a lot of different things to get you to perform the attack down the line. Organization intelligence is important. I think insider threats play a big key in this area. Knowing what's on the inside. So insider job tends to have clear understanding, especially with the network, the infrastructure, secrecy, the type of information that no one would know on the outside. So, the time and the resources is going to help them build the organization intelligence. And then hardware and software tools, ultimately at the end of the day, right? It's the computer that's going to launch the attack, the human behind the computer instructed to perform the attack, and then having the proper software tools. Sometimes you would have to pay people to build the tool, or sometimes that can be the tool that's already exists in the industry, like exploitation kits and other things that can be modified to be able to launch the attack. So the kits are, they come in different flavor. They're kits for various purpose, right? So out of the box, they are already able to use those kits, but also can be customized. Any question on this? So definitely attack require resources that we commonly see in operations as well. So if you really want to look at the defense tactic or the mechanism that we need against these attacks, we are going to need the same thing, right? For most part, time, money, people, knowledge, the technical and the soft skills. Having a thorough understanding of our organization infrastructure and how we can better protect it, and then the software and the hardware. So on both sides, you see that there's equivalent need in both of those areas. Sometimes you do need more resources on the defensive side, versus the attack side. So because there are more that you can lose from operation overall if you're looking at it from the enterprise perspective, because disruption costs us money, or when you have shutdown for weeks and days, that can cost a lot of, you lose customer, you lose profit. So all right, for this one, number 7, we're gonna go ahead and visit the spam house threat map. So a lot of the maps really map out attacks. And then this particular threat map maps out bots. So the blinking little yellow dots that you see are the bot activities. And you can put your cursor on the menu and it's gonna pop up, right? The countries that have the most bots, or it says the top 10 worst botnet country. So we usually rank high anyways in the US. So United States usually within the top 5. So right now we're second after China, and then right after us is India. Then you have Brazil. So some South American countries are popping up on the scenes. And then you have Vietnam, and then you also see some Asian countries. China and Vietnam are on there. And sometimes you do see like Russia and African countries would show up on the list, and it would be very based on activity, but usually the top 5 kind of, stay pretty the same. So it does the count for us. And then for the ISP, the internet service provider that have the worst botnets, I mean the most botnets, right? So you do see we have Charter up here. And then some China-based, there's some VPN ones, and then Amazon.com. Now, botnet doesn't necessarily mean that there are for attacks. They're just groups of systems that can, can launch automated things like scripts and run things. So they don't necessarily mean bad things. I think that when we refer to botnets in cybersecurity, a lot of the times there's negative connotation with it. But botnets can be used for other things, for operations as well. So, but a lot of the times when you hear botnets on the news, usually it has negative connotation connected to it, or negative intentions for the botnets in the news. And then you can zoom in, and if you want to narrow down on certain country to look for, you can do that as well. So all you have to do is view the information. You can answer some of the questions. And then where can I find the last 24 hours botnet count? So when you go back to the heat map, and this number varies. So do an approximate. So when I looked at it yesterday and then later on earlier today, it was higher. So it depends on the time of the day that you look also, right? Like sometimes you see this more in the 200 versus right now it's at 153, and then sometime it will drop lower or higher. So it varies. And they do gather that, so they build out the data analysis for you here. Kind of cool to see. So this can be helpful for your threat intelligence, right? To have a little bit more overview on the type, how the number of botnets are out there and how they can potentially, be used for denial of service attacks or. Okay. Okay, so after that section, the note's gonna bring you to dark web or deep web, right? A lot of people refer to it as dark web, but it's also known as deep web. In order to use the dark web, you need to have a Tor browser. I know that if you took my CIS27, or you might have seen a tutorial on how to install Tor browser, it's fairly easy to use. So you would require to use the Tor browser or some form of secure browser, but right now it's only Tor browser. And you would use a specific URL on the Tor browser. Tor browser is private, so it doesn't disclose a lot of the information on, the traffic. And so it is a little bit more secure when you're using Tor browser. So unlike Chrome and other browser, which can be open in how it shares the data, Tor browser is a little bit more higher in privacy. So that means that when I live in a country that's more restricted, that has nation firewall, that's filtering, and if I need to access certain sources, I can use the Tor browser or the dark web to be able to do that. So on the beneficial side, the deep web and the dark web can be used in the restricted area. But on the negative side of things, the dark web, as you know, contain a lot of criminal activities, things that would be related to organized crime. So such as exchange of data for identity theft, right? People would go on there and be able to buy a list of social security number, address, and information about individuals that have been leaked. and then use that for identity theft purposes. Online drug trafficking and human trafficking exists in the dark web. Our governments monitor this, right? Looking at the activities, and I'm sure there are other nations that look into this as well. Can you control fully? It's a little bit harder as some of these servers are also secured, right? Accessing some of these websites or channel can also be difficult. So there are agents and agency that goes on these websites, right, through Tor to be able to monitor some activity. You know, they say the person who create the dark web, right? There's a documentary on him. I think if you can find it online, he's in prison. Supposedly it's him, but he denies it now. His family and him, they've been contesting it, but lifetime in prison, as you know, they got him for murder, actually, of an admin. But you can look into the documentary or the articles. Kind of interesting. Okay, so how can you gather some more intelligence about threats? We can go two routes. One is using the proprietary threat intelligence. So if you work for the military, the government, they have their own source for threat intelligence. And then security organization, they do share some of the threat information, like you can, but you have to sign up or you have to subscribe. So some intelligence in the proprietary area, you have to pay for. I think the book refers to a website, and when I went on it, you know, a lot of the security company, you have to sign up to get the feed, which is free for most part. And then some security company would require you to subscribe, like $100 a month, or it could be less, $10 a month. And then you would get the news feed about specific threat that they have researched and gathered, right? And then you have open source threat intelligence like OSINT, Mitre attack. There are other sources that you can find that are freely available. And then you can also subscribe to your vendor, you know, whenever that they have vulnerabilities and things, so we can refer to the databases for, you know, CVV and so on. Now, one thing that the book mentioned that other books might not is your human intelligence. So in reconnaissance, you would send people or individuals to perform physical reconnaissance. Like if you're able to access certain rooms or door, if you're able to ask for information from people on site, right? Employees, people that work there. So physically, this form of intelligence needs to be performed by individuals. You must have the human. I know that we talk about having AI in a lot of things nowadays. Well, AI can and machine learning can gather once we have the data, that can be helpful, but some part of our work also required the physical human to be able to assess or obtain information from another human or group of people. So, and when we do this form of recon, we always want to make sure that it aligns with our goals, fulfill our objective in what kind of information that we're trying to gather, right? For our needs or our project. Okay. So in the next part, I think we're going to talk a little bit about model and frameworks. So how do you go about looking at, so here it talks about, you know, there's some, I visited this site, you have to subscribe to it to get the thread feed, but there are other sites that you can get. deep web. We touch on proprietary and open source and human intelligence. So frameworks is gonna give us the tools and some, approaches on how we would be able to look at the attacker's perspective and what we can do to mitigate. For example, like when we're looking at Mitre attack, this is just a common knowledge base where we would be able to look at techniques, some type of tools that they would use in specific attack. And I have you do an exercise where you look at the ICS to see, and then how can we, the recommendation in the industry on how we can close out that security gap or reduce it to a lower risk. So it gives you a little bit of information about Mitre, how it was formed. It is government funded, right? This resource is freely available for the industry. So, and they regularly update it. So this is done, created for security professional by security professional. So it is very helpful. And the matrices that you have is going to give you a better understanding of tactics and techniques that are used by attackers. So the framework really lay out specific things that you want, from cloud to network to applications to control systems, you name it, they have a lot of things documented. So it's going to look something like this. So what we'll do is we are going to complete that exercise. So it tells you that you are going to, for 11, you are going to go look at the matrix for the enterprise. And you're welcome to check out the other things. So when you visit this, it's kind of break it down into the attack stages, right? Recon is one of the bigger area. So you would start out with actively scan. And then, you can go into some in-depth about, getting information. An attacker can fish for information. They can search for information. They can go into get some information from the network and so on, right? So we're going to click the first one, which is actively scanning. And it tells you what that entails. So basically running scans to be able to get some information like operating system, endpoints, IP addresses, MAC addresses, network information, and so on. And the example that they have is here. So some of the mitigation, if you look at it closer, is the before the compromise, right? This is how you can do a proactive defense before the compromise, right? When you're looking at the scope and the enterprises for the defense control, can we really prevent this? No, we cannot. It's a lot harder to really say that, oh, we cannot prevent scan because our system is really designed to listen to other systems. So the application, and when you're looking at like protocol analyzer, because our services, our systems, the way it is created, it's going to communicate and it is going to be able to provide information about who's sending, who's receiving, what kind of services, right? So, and we cannot really, there are ways that we can look at who is scanning us, but a lot of times, it's a lot harder to control. So from an external party standpoint, you cannot control who is scanning you, and when they scan you, right? Like we are just gonna be a little bit more aware that it's gonna happen, and so this is a way that we can detect and defense. So in detection, most of the time we revert back to your network traffic, right? If someone is scanning us, likely that they have to be part of our network to be able to scan us. So if we do a better job in network monitoring, right, process and network monitoring, we would be able to detect quicker. So ultimately, active scanning, the only way that you can, you know, build some kind of solution for this is reactive, to be able to monitor to see who is scanning you and how long or what they're looking for by looking at network traffic. But you can go further into other techniques. So they would give you like phishing, and then the layout is still the same, right? It talks about how you can do mitigations with phishing, how you can detect phishing. This is really good if you are combating phishing. I would go here and look at the framework information and be able to have a better understanding, right, of potential attacks and how they would approach it, and how I can build out some mechanism for defense. And then in actively scan, we also can we can drill down, like if they're doing vulnerability scanning, which is what we're gonna do today. If we're scanning IP or we're using word lists to scan, right? So you can look further into how this can break down into different type of scan. And as the industry have new tools, right? The attacker also have new tools, and it gets updated. So the knowledge base will grow as the industry changes. So I think that this industry is very fluid. It's constantly adapting and modifying, and there are new ways to either protect or break, right? So we constantly have to update ourselves in this area. Okay. So as you look at the actively scan technique, you can answer these questions. Can actively scan technique be easily mitigated? Not easily mitigated, no, right? But we know that it can be detected by network monitoring. And then for 12, we're going to look at ICS. You guys know what ICS stands for? Control system. Yeah. This is used for manufacturing, farming, industrial type of environment, so much more, right? It could also be used by government, military, and other things. But when you look at advanced manufacturing, you might see a lot of ICS. This is here with us to stay because there's a lot of automation that's involved in these areas. So when you look at this, it kind of like a widespread of things from, alarm suppression, which is not notifying, to man in the middle, to firmware exposure, to there's so many different things. And as they gather this, or brute force, right? Credential change. There are a lot of different things that would fall into ICS. So we would look at what would be relevant to us. So I would have you visit the site, and then you can select a technique of your choice. It doesn't have to be, I don't want to tell you what to select. So if something triggers your mind, or you see it seems interesting, then we can click on it and read more about it, right? You should be able to find some kind of technique ID right off the bat before you click. So when we build out the database for threat intelligence, you want to document these things, right? What is the potential threat? How severe is it, right? What kind of ID information you have on the name? Who can perform this type of attack? How can it be performed? right? Who would be the targeted, or what kind of assets is it gonna be targeting? So all of this piece of information needs to go into a repository for your organization, because, and then we would base on the impact, right? The vulnerability and the impact score, that's how we're gonna address it. We might have 1,000 things that would be listed, but the most impacted is gonna get addressed first. Okay? So when you look at this, be mindful of the information that you can gather to build your knowledge base. So for example, if I click on brute force IO, right? It would tell me, so IO is for input and output, and it would change some kind of function values. So this is an example, right? A module that was impacted in certain modes. So what are the targeted assets? Control server, right? HMI, electronic devices that are intelligent, and you can click on it to read it a little bit further what they are. Remote terminal unit, right? Safety controller, and how we can mitigate it. Filter your network traffic. A lot of it comes back to network traffic, right? This is why cybersecurity is really entail a larger understanding of network and how network devices communicate. And then whitelisting, segmentation, and then how you can detect it, application log, network traffic, operational database, and so on. So you get the idea. We would look at the technique, and then we would be able to get the recommendation from Mitre to be able to derive our solution. Now, then the notes bring you to models, attack models, or they call it intrusion analysis model. And there are quite a few type of models out there, but the diamond model for intrusion analysis is really used by forensic analysts, right? And forensic is also used for incident response. We can find out like how they intrude in the system or the network or compromise. So digital forensic analysts use the diamond model to discover indicator of compromise, your IOCs. And the approach that is commonly used is to look at historical logs. This is what we mostly do in security for a lot of things. So we would go back, look at the logs to see how they entered the system or the network. Then 14, you're gonna visit Lockheed Martin website, and it's gonna contain cyber kill chain. The book does give you a screenshot, and I think I include that in the notes of the actual website or the web page of cyber kill chain. So when you visit here, it's gonna give you the stages for APT. It's similar to the other model. We would start with recon. And in recon, it would include activities such as harvesting email addresses, obtaining conference information, potentially go to social media and find out posts, etc. Right? And that can also be scanned. Whether we passively scan, we can use, we can do passive recon or active recon. Then in the second stage, it would be weaponization, and this is for exploitation and backdoor to deliver payload. And then the third stage, so after that, you would deliver, right? So you build the tools that you need, and then you would deliver that via email, web, USB, etc. Text. And then the exploitation, it occurs with, just utilizing the vulnerability to execute code on the system. That would be one activity. Then installation of malware or code that could be executed onto the asset. So that could be servers, systems, appliances, controllers, etc. And then command and control. So at this point, you, as an attacker, you would have remote control of the system. So we'll be able to do whatever that we need for the objective of the attack. So all of those steps really build to having full control of the system. And then to accomplish the goal, whether to take data or to disrupt services, this is when the objectives is met, stage 7. Okay, so on the website, you'll be able to visit and see, but if you scroll down on the bottom, right, they are actively hiring. So if you want to work in various part of the country, you can go here and then you can choose your path. They have specific area, right? Like advanced manufacturing, machine learning, cyber engineering technology. So if we look at cyber, and then it tells you that you can also look at the jobs, right? It also drills down to the subcategory, right? We talked about intelligence today, right? That can be your job. So intelligence analyst, and then get into more of like reverse engineering and also with hardware engineering, and then cybersecurity engineering. So, but if we go the general cybersecurity route, you would be able to see a lot of development job. I have a lot of computer science students that want to get into cybersecurity that ask, about this area. Definitely something that you can look at, and something can also sound crazy, with the experience, but there are other, right? There's reverse engineering vulnerability. So you do see some of the reverse engineering, and then pen testing. You know that because Lockheed is contracted with military and government, so you are gonna work closer to the base, and then also some agency. Now they are not the only company that contracted with the government. You can also find job with Raytheon. You can also find job with General Dynamics. And then what's the other one in San Diego? Now it left my mind, but I'll think of it. There are quite a few companies that are actively hiring in a lot of this area. So there's a huge demand for cybersecurity, right? You can also become InfoSec officer. There are, DevSecOps, so many things. So check them out. Look at the skill sets, right? How can you get from here to there, right? That's the question. How can I get from the time I'm taking classes to the job that I want, right? It doesn't necessarily be this company, but if you can line that up, and say, okay, these are the certs, these are the type of experience I need, this is the knowledge that I need, then you just have to be able to supplement that, right? Okay. All right, so 14, look at the website, put down the activities. And then it talks about threat hunting, just a small section. I think there are other sources that are also expanded in this topic. But the methods or approaches of threat hunting would include, number one, you should adopt a framework or a model that's going to help you find or discover IOCs easier. Because the industry already supply you with a lot of information about the type of threats that the industry sees. It's a lot easier to refer to the framework, like what we looked at with Mitre, or look at the model, right? And that would lay out the activities and the stages in an attack or the type of threat that you would see. It's recommended that you do what's called a threat emulation exercise or have a way to know the processes in how you can fine tune or improve your tools and techniques and procedures. Because if you practice it over time, it's a lot easier for you to respond to threat in the case that when it actually happens. So that means that you would simulate the attack, you would look at the logs, you would look at the network traffic, and see if your tools can stand up to detecting, right? Or responding to threat. So for example, if I have the distributed denial of service attack, I wanted to see if my network monitoring tool sees that, right? But in order to have that form of attack, I have to simulate it. I have to perform some kind of test-based attack. And then to see if we are, like a drill, we are doing well with responding, the technique that we use, how long did we use, what kind of resource we need. So after you perform this multiple times, you would see the efficiency and the effectiveness of your threat emulation. And then we would need to be able to recognize the events that are threatening. And that will come back to threat intelligence, right? And threat emulation. So we would have better preparation. And in the industry, you often hear the term, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. And it's not a matter of if it's going to happen. So to better prepare in the response compared to not able to respond at all and being disrupted. So it sounds like a sales pitch, but that's the reality of things, right? People, and you do see a lot of notification of late. You hear a lot of things in social media about data leak and people been breached. It's just, no one is foolproof. So as we go through and be able to, let me move this 15 and 16 down so you can have both of these. So I just summarized that section. You can definitely find some of the verbatim from the notes. So for 16, we want to kind of look at the tools, and I added some stuff from there. This is not exactly verbatim in notes, but based on, all the prior classes and the knowledge that you have in security, you should be able to come up with the answers for these. So 16, identify the type of tools or devices to assess the given types of logs. So when we say system logs, then we would assume that it could be many or multiple different operating systems. So we would revert back to operating system logs. So for Windows, we would refer to Event Viewer, which gives you errors, applications, security logs, all of that in one console. In Linux, we would go to syslog. For Mac OS, you can go to errors and faults, and then they have a mechanism called reports to be able to pull more details in the type of issues that you would see with Mac OS. I have to dig around a little bit on how Mac would have these things. So that's, when we look at client systems, it would be like that. And then you will also look at application logs, in the case that for specific apps. Most apps are web apps, but then also native apps that you install. So when you install that, the logs can also reveal some information about application permissions and privileges and things like that, in the background. And as system would connect to the web, you would see DNS. So from the server end of the house, from the network end of the house, the endpoints are connected to domain name system, and also they are obtaining an IP address from the network. When you're looking at remote systems, or bring your own devices, laptop, desktop, etc., it's always good for us to go back to the system that provides the service to look at the logs for the endpoint devices. So system logs can be a wide variety of things. You need to assess it from a client and a server standpoint, okay? Depending on the objective. So when you're looking at, specific systems that were targeted compared to a range of systems that are targeted. And then you got network logs. So when we deal with threats that are related to network, we need to look at switches, routers. Sorry, I had missed the comma after servers there, but servers, firewall, your security appliances like IDS, IPS, and then we also need to take a look at alert systems, especially with the data loss prevention type of system, because that really entail like where the data sits, how the data is accessed, and so on. So alert system and logs are useful. I think alert system is more of like a reactive approach, but logs is also a reactive approach where it's a component in how we react to incidents. Sorry. All right, vulnerability logs, we can look at scanning tool reports like Nessus, OpenVAS, Nmap. So that can also be displayed on screen, or you can export that out into a report format as text. SIEM alerts and logs, because that's a management system for security. So we would be able to have like a centralized log and alert. And then when we look at access logs, so if we see escalation of privileges, right, or someone is brute forcing or attempted to do so anyways, we would look at authentication server logs. But in the case that if someone is, before they leak data, they have to access the data. And when they change the access, usually it's storage and permission. So you need to evaluate where the data sits. Storage logs or database logs in the database management console is going to give you that, along with if you're looking at files and file permissions. So if they're running like executable, a lot of times they need to have the privilege to run executable, and then to access that executable, they have to place it onto the system on the network. So you need to audit permissions. And then for, if you have a file integrity alert, if the file has been modified, it would notify you. So there are mechanisms that we place it onto, various area of our systems or our infrastructure to better protect our assets. So if you have alert system, that's always helpful to go back. And then the logs, it's just records of, activities or events that occurred to that system. Any question? Almost done, just a few more and then we'll take a break and do the lab. Okay, 17, how should you prioritize security alerts and notifications? And a lot of times these systems already have a ranking mechanism, but if you do it manually, you prioritize based on your CVSS, Common Vulnerability Scoring System or impact score. Um, you know, and sometimes the score will fall into different levels like critical or the level of severity, um, low, medium, or high in criticality. And so that is usually based on the vulnerability scores or the impact score. I think 41A I addressed on how you can calculate this. You can also go to, I know Mitre also has that and also other websites. NIST provides you with details on how you can calculate the impact score and the CVSS. Now, the overall, from a perspective of how can we maintain effective rules for security, um, ultimately, it really comes down to the organization. When you're looking at from one company to the next, even in the same industry, you might not have the same exact need. There's some general needs in operation that's the same. And, so we can do something similar, but a lot of times you need to frequently customize and update the rules based on the organization need and the trend. This is why, we focus on the important area in this particular chapter, threat intelligence, is to really effectively change your rules based on the intelligence that you have for your organization that, potential threats that will impact your company. So this is why there is, you would see jobs like engineer for the firewall or some different area for the security, because the firewall itself is a really living type of appliance. If you only set the rule and forget about it, what will happen is you would eventually have a vulnerability that grows. So you want to make sure that you adapt and change, just like everything else that we do for cybersecurity, right? Because things also change on the attacker end or on the threat end. So we have to change. And with the behavior rules, how can that be applied? So when the security appliance detects anomaly, it's gonna put that into behavior analysis. And we can use AI or machine learning, ML, to be able to build the rule sets for the normal activities. So first, you need to give it the data on what is normal, right? You got to teach the artificial intelligence on what activities would be considered normal in your infrastructure. So that means that we are modeling normal user behavior, normal network activity, normal system behavior. And anything outside of that, it would then put it into the data, then everything that outside of our scope of normal would be considered abnormal. So when you do the behavior rule this way, it is a little bit more on the false positive side. We are a little bit more finicky and sensitive to security means, but ultimately we want to be sensitive as much as possible. So a little bit more cautious than less is on the safe side. Any question? Just the last one now, right? So on the last part of the notes, it talks about scripting, and scripting is done for automation, and automation is great. I think that automation is going to help us reduce error, human error. It's going to help us streamline the work. Um, it's definitely here to stay for most part because in the larger enterprises, automation is wonderful. But we also need to look at how scripting can be used in various area. And today we're going to look at web searches for websites. So the recommendation is that in order to kind of reduce some of the risk in in recon the website for attack, we can implement regular expression in the scripts to control, right, how the search would be from our website. So let's say that you have a website, whether your website does retail or just provide information for your company. What you can do is you can include the scripts to be able to control the search mechanism, like the search bar that they type in, right? To protect from scans or to capture data, injection and other things, right? So ultimately, this is a way that we can protect searches or requests, right? Because they could just use that to scan against your web server, your domains, to be able to grab some banner, to be able to pull some information. So we can implement scripting for that. I thought that's a cool suggestion because you don't always see that popping up on like common practices for security. A lot of the textbooks just say, oh, scripting is great, but then they don't go further into that. But so one skill that I highly recommend that you obtain from now until you finish some of the courses is to learn to script, whether you do it here in class or you learn it outside, and you need to practice. Learning programming languages is always a plus. Python, JavaScript, and then understanding how to use regular expression in your script. So we use regular expression to control input for a lot of things, right? Like digits and so on. So when you do input validation, when you do, data sanitizing, when you're testing code and all of these things are going to be useful. So definitely, brush up your skills on scripting, and that's going to help you go a long way in cybersecurity, right? Or even IT, right? Scripting for automation is awesome. Okay. Any questions? We should be done with our notes and lecture for today. I'm going to stop recording. So I can